Have you ever tried to write a story only to run out of story in the middle? There's a reason that happened, and it's because school lied to you about the three-act structure. They tell you that a story has a beginning, middle, and end, but it doesn't. The three-act structure you learned in school is dead wrong. In this video, I'm going to go into detail on why the three-act story structure is sabotaging your story and what you should do instead, and also how an outline can make your writing better, faster, and more fun. Hi Novelteer, I'm Devlin Blake, novel writing and self-publishing expert, coach, published author, and former ghostwriter of 200 books. If you stick around to the end, I'll reveal my little-known method for filling in that outline fast. So what the heck am I talking about? How is the three-part story structure you were taught in school wrong? Stories actually do have a beginning, a middle, and end, don't they? Well, no they don't, and here's why. Your brain likes things to be equal. When you tell it that a story has a beginning, middle, and end, it thinks, three equal parts. Only, that's wrong. Take a look at a story sometime, and I mean really look at it. The beginning and end are equal, but the middle isn't. The middle part is actually twice as long as either the beginning or the end. It's not an equal part. This is why your story runs out of story halfway through. A story is actually 4 equal parts, not 3. Did that blow your mind? It did me too when I first discovered it after reading hundreds of stories. And if it did for you too, put it down in the comments. Also mention if your story has ever run out of story in the middle. So now let's take a look at the 4 parts better and answer the question, so what are the parts if it's not a beginning, middle, and end? Well, simple. It's a beginning. That part hasn't changed. There's a reactive middle, a proactive middle, and an end. And what the heck does that mean? Well, the beginning is where you introduce the characters, their world, and their problems. And let's take a look at that in a little more detail. At the very start of the book, we discover today is not like yesterday in a significant way. As the start ramps up, this continues. An escalation happens that changes the character's life. Then they make a decision or take an action that forever changes their default future. For example, let's look at Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. It opens with the family heading to the zoo because it's Dudley's birthday. That's how today isn't like yesterday and how it wouldn't be like tomorrow. Once they arrive, that whole snake thing happens and Harry discovers he's a wizard. He's even invited to Hogwarts. That's the issue ramping up. Then Hagrid arrives since the mail isn't getting through, and that's the escalation. He tells Harry about himself and his new future. The decision Harry makes isn't whether or not to go with Hagrid, but whether or not to get on that train. Up until that point, he could have turned around, forgot this happened, and lived his default life. But of course, who'd want to do that in his situation? But once he gets on that train, there's no turning back. So is this making sense so far? Comment below. And that's the beginning. So now we move on to the reactive middle. This is where the characters react to things that go on around them, but they aren't really in charge of their life yet. It consists of making friends, making enemies, and discovering the problem they didn't even know was going to be a problem. It's also about watching the characters settle into their new circumstances, for better or worse. In Harry Potter, this is where Harry meets Ron, Hermione, Draco, and a bit later, Snape. See, friends and enemies. He tries to settle into this new life. He goes to class, his dorms, and tries to be a decent enough student. He discovers the pureblood problem through Draco and Hermione and Hagrid. Then he discovers about Voldemort and the stone. This is the problem he wasn't even sure was going to be a problem yet, and now suddenly it is. So he tries to settle into his life again. Notice he's still reacting. He keeps his distance from people like Draco, tries to ignore the Voldemort issue, and joins Quidditch. And then there's an attempt on his life. And now we're at the 50% mark. The 50% mark is when the biggest change happens. That's when the story forces the character into the proactive middle. It forces them to take charge of their own life. This is when Harry realizes that Voldemort has returned and he no longer has the luxury of ignoring the problem, hoping it goes away. Because Voldemort's not going anywhere. At this point, we're in the proactive middle. The 3rd part out of 4 parts. So far, we've discussed what happens at the beginning, in the reactive middle, and the big shift that forces the character to change from reactive to proactive. This 3rd part that we're in right now is where the character decides to take control of their own life. They take an action or make some plans, but the plans don't work out as planned, and everything falls apart. Things go increasingly wrong, which only makes the character try harder. In Harry Potter, this is the part where he and his friends decide to find the stone before Voldemort can. They go into the bowels of the school, face all kinds of trials they didn't know they were going to face. One by one, Harry gets separated from his friends. Finally, he's all alone and realizes that he'll have to move forward alone. Now it's time for the ending block, which includes the false victory, the truth coming out, the final battle, and the wrap-up. This is still the ending part. Harry finds the stone, and he thinks he's done. That's the false victory. Then he discovers Quirrell's secret. That's where the truth comes out. They fight for the stone, and Quirrell is defeated. That's the final battle. Harry wakes up in the infirmary and realizes he's fine, but now there's a bigger battle ahead of him. That's the wrap-up. And that's the ending block. This is how the 4-part story structure works. If this helped you, be sure to mention it down in the comments. So let's recap. You'll need a reason today is not like yesterday, an escalation of the problem, and a decision for the first block. That's the beginning. For the second block, you'll need friends, enemies, and a problem the character wants to ignore. You're also going to have a character trying to fit into this new life of theirs. That's the reactive middle. Right before you move to the third block, you'll need a reason that the character needs to be proactive. This is the shift that changes everything and forces them into action. That's the 50% mark. Now we're in the third block, the proactive middle. The character tries to take control and do some things, but the things all go wrong until the character is all alone. And finally, we're at the ending block. We have the false victory, the truth coming out, the final battle, and the wrap-up. And that's all there is to it. That's the basic outline of writing a book and how the 4-part story method helps you do it without running out of story in the middle. Remember, beginning, reactive middle, proactive middle, force shift at the 50% mark, and the ending. And if that helped you, let me know below. So now, that tip I mentioned. Let's talk about how to fill in your outline fast. It's a method I call the 100 scenes. Simply pull up a document in your favorite word processor, Word, Docs, Notebook, whatever you have, and make a list 1 to 100. Number it. Then bullet point 100 scenes. Any order. Don't critique them at this point. Once you're done, plug them into your various blocks, and then see what stays, what goes, and what needs fill-in. Now this is a basic outline built on the 4-part story structure. I actually have a more in-depth outline inside my program, which you can find at the link below, along with a library of courses including genre help, creating compelling characters, and a whole lot more. Be sure to check it out.